Belle Royal was once a well-known witch in Caithness. She was tall and strongly built, with a fine moustache and a number of hairs on her chin. She wore a man's coat and vest, although did keep a few petticoats. She claimed to have occult powers, and told people it wouldn't be safe for them to incur her wrath. She made a point of impressing this on the minds of the fisherfolk. She told them that she could give herring to those she liked, and withhold the fish from those who didn't treat her well. During the fishing season, Belle, who lived at Latheron, could often be seen down by the harbours close to her home, including Force, Leipster, Latheronwheel and Dunbeath, where she would often demand a few herring from each boat. To the skipper of one boat, she told him, "Give royally, and you will get royally." The fisherman gave her 30 herring. After she'd counted them, she told him, "You will have 30 crans tomorrow." So it happened the next day. The fisherman did indeed get 30 crans. This helped establish her reputation among the fisherfolk and gave rise to her name, Belle Royal. Young women often visited Belle to get their fortunes told, but they didn't go empty-handed, making sure they had a silver coin or two with them. Most of the time, Belle read tea leaves from a teacup. Before doing the reading, she would say, "He that doth well, good will befall him." She was nobody's fool, and had a good insight into human nature, that for the most part she was able to say things close enough to the truth to give a favourable impression on her enthusiastic clients. Moreover, they knew it wouldn't be in their interests if they offended her in any way. She got her water for the tea from a well in a neighbouring farm, and when the farmer drained the well in order to add it to his field for crops, Belle was furious. In a fit of rage, she predicted that in a short time, 6 or 7 feet of Mother Earth would be all that he would need, and nothing would grow where the well once stood. It was said the farmer died a short time later, and that nothing ever did grow where the well had once been. Belle was not the first woman to blackmail fishermen. Long before her time, fishermen along the coast from Helmsdale to Leipster entered into a formal agreement with Jenny Horn at the beginning of each herring season, so the legend goes. She said that they would have a good catch, but only if they gave her so many herring out of every cran caught. By Belle's time, belief in witchcraft had begun to wane, yet Belle got her quota of fish, whether fishermen believed her or not. She also managed to get agricultural and dairy produce from the local farmers and crofters. One evening, Belle invited herself to the local minister's house with the intention of staying overnight. She got the usual cordial welcome, and a bed was made up for her. Knowing Belle was there, some of the local young folk came to the house for a ceilidh, along with 1 or 2 curious adults. A blazing peat fire and a paraffin lamp gave the kitchen a cosy feel to it. Belle then proceeded to take off her boots and changed into a pair of old slippers, however put them on the wrong feet. One of the youngsters noticed and said to her, "Belle, you have put the slippers on your feet the contrary way." She looked at her feet and said, "So I have, but that is the way of the world in our time. People contrary to one another, and I may as well be like other folk." The children asked her lots of questions, and both she and they had a lot of fun that night. She pretended to do wonderful things in the witchcraft line. She pulled a long chain out of her bosom, with 20 shillings attached to it. When she had a spare shilling, she told them she would pierce a hole in it and add it to her chain. This was perhaps money to pay for her funeral, as people set aside money for such an eventuality. She stretched out her arms fully and dangled the chain in front of the children. She said to them, if anyone would but touch that chain, he or she would fall dead on the spot. The lady of the house grabbed the chain, but nothing happened, and Belle and the company burst out laughing. When Belle was an old woman, there was no family to take care of her, and she began to become senile. As there was no one, the parochial board sent her to an asylum. She wasn't there very long when she was sent home, supposedly cured, but she did find it funny when they dressed her in what she termed her fineries and a bonnet, which really tickled her fancy. Belle died alone in her hut near the old bell tower of Latheron. This Belle is one of 3 alleged witches called Belle in Caithness. Another was called Bold Bad Belle. She lived with her 3 bachelor brothers and 3 spinster sisters, and they hadn't long arrived in the district when strange things began to happen. When one of their cattle strayed onto their neighbour's land and was chased back onto its own land, a calf belonging to that person died in its stall the next morning. If the hens wandered into the neighbours and were shooed back, then the neighbours' hens would stop laying, while their hens produced many more eggs. Belle was the boss of her siblings, and had the reputation of being the most proficient among them in the black arts. When Belle had an argument with people out with the family, and they replied to her in the same way, they would lose their voices for a few weeks afterwards. At the time, it was common for each herd of cattle sent to the common grazings to have a couple of pigs among them. Belle's family had no pigs, and their cattle weren't used to them, becoming restless and frightened by them. Belle spoke to the owners of the pigs and asked them to be removed from the common grazing ground, but they refused. So Belle took matters into her own hands. In the grazing, there was a dangerous peaty stretch of burn that flowed through the ground with overhanging banks. One day, 3 pigs were found drowned in the burn, and 2 more had to be rescued. Ever since that day, it became known as the Pig's Pool. One woman lost a valuable pig thanks to Belle's cantrips, and her cow stopped producing milk. The woman was furious and went to see Belle. A fight ensued, and somehow this woman managed to carve a cross on Belle's forehead with a darning needle, and for several days, Belle had to wear a headband to cover it up. During this time, Belle also lost her powers, and the woman's cow began producing milk once more. The following spring, Belle and the woman had another falling out, but the woman told Belle she would happily scar her again with a darning needle. Soon afterwards, Belle and her family left the district and were never seen again. The final Belle was Belle of Brims. She lived on the west side of Holborn Head and was fairly old when she gained her reputation as a witch, but she was said to excel at her craft. She managed to help herself to the produce of her neighbours' cows, and even whales in the sea. One day she called at Brim's Castle and found the dairymaid churning butter. Belle offered to increase the amount of butter she was churning by 10-fold, without any loss to the farmer. The dairymaid accepted the offer, and when the butter came, the churn could barely cope. However, it tasted a little fishy. The dairymaid asked, "Where did all this butter come from?" And Belle replied she'd taken it from a female whale she'd seen out at sea. Belle was distinct thanks to her clothing. She wore an old linen coif, a tartan plaid fastened with a silver brooch, a red petticoat, and white woolen stockings. She always carried a stout walking stick. Belle had friends on Orkney, and when she wished to visit them, she commandeered a crab, and using her demonic powers, would sit on the back of it and cross the Pentland Firth. Travelling by sea was commonplace in Caithness, as the roads at the time were either poor or non-existent. Rob Campbell owned and captained the chief boat running between Thurso and Tongue in Sutherland. He had the misfortune to incur Belle's wrath, and it was widely known she hated him. Once she vowed that his next sea journey would be his last. On hearing this, Rob and his wife were appalled and believed that she could indeed carry out her threat. For months, he never went to sea, but one day an urgent matter cropped up and he was forced to travel by boat. He set sail one fine summer's morning and rounded Holborn Head. As the boat reached Brimsness, a storm whipped up and tore the sails to ribbons. The boat was nearly swamped, so an order went up to return to Thurso, but the tide was too strong and the hurricane surrounded them. It's likely Rob knew that this was the work of Belle. The men lost control of the boat and it drifted, finally being wrecked on the island of Stroma. Rob and his men were all lost at sea. On that morning, Belle had heard Rob was about to set sail, so she'd filled a tub with water to represent the sea. She placed a wooden bowl in the tub where it floated. She then put water in an earthenware jar and corked it tightly, placing it beside a blazing fire. This represented the magical power of the wind and wave. Having done this, she repeated and kept repeating an incantation suitable for her revenge. Another witch and friend of Belle stood watch, looking out for the boat, and had reported to her that it had indeed set sail. Belle slackened the cork and allowed the jet of steam to shoot out. Ripples were seen on top of the tub, representing the choppy sea. In a little while, she allowed a stronger blast of steam to escape from the jar, and the water became even more agitated. The storm at sea corresponded with this action. Eventually, she let all the steam escape, and the tub became like a bubbling cauldron, with the bowl floating on the water capsizing, just like the boat. Belle revelled in her success and shouted, "Robbie Campbell is a wonu." After this tragedy, Belle's reputation grew, and no one dared to refuse her anything she wanted. When she was on her deathbed, the local minister visited in hope that she may repent. Instead, she cursed him and ordered him out of her sight. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.